All right, let's go ahead and get started. I think we've got a decent crowd here now. Maybe we'll get a few more stragglers joining us. So thanks everyone for joining. We had a month off, so I hope everyone is having a good summer. Even though it's now August, I guess kids are getting ready to go back to school. So in some sense, summer's approaching the end. But before we dive into things, I just wanted to introduce a couple of new folks. For those of you who came on the walking tour, you already met Will and Kristen, but they are new to CPD and will be helping out on the Near Southeast team going forward. Libby, who you may remember helping out previously, has gotten promoted. So that's great for her, but unfortunately that means she's transitioning off of this team onto other work. So we are bringing in Will and Kristen to help replace Libby. So Will, Kristen, I don't know if you want to say just a brief hello.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Will Prince here. Excited to work with everybody.
Hi, I'm Kristen Brando, also new to the team. I've met a couple of you on our walking tour, but the rest of you, nice to meet you.
Okay, great. So yeah, you'll see Will and Kristen around going forward. There we are. All right, share the presentation here. So today wanted to give sort of an update on where we are on the project, since again we haven't met since June and a lot has happened since then. So wanted to keep everybody up to date on what has happened, what we're working on currently, and what's coming up. And then have a few of those issues that we want to talk about around Colorado Station redevelopment, balancing affordability, design, and preservation in the residential areas, improving mobility safety, and dealing with the old code zoning. And then leave some time for any other topics that anyone else would like to discuss from the draft recommendations. So let me dive into the project update. So as you'll recall, we are in phase 3 of the engagement. This is review and refine draft recommendations. So our goals for this round of community engagement are, again, to refine the draft recommendations that we've shared with the community. For the ones where we've shared a few alternatives or opportunities, taking feedback on those to create that preferred alternative. For some of the project ideas in those draft recommendations, making sure we're vetting those projects both with the community and with our partners internally and externally in the city. Updating some of the maps, identifying where we want modal priority areas and things like that. And then again, being clear about how we're using previous feedback from the community to create the draft recommendations, and how we'll use the feedback that we're getting on those draft recommendations moving forward. So those are our goals for this round of engagement. To do the engagement, we've got a few things lined up. We have online surveys, workshops, office hours. We're going to be doing another round of focus groups here coming up, and then continuing our intentional engagement and our community navigators work. So we launched the online surveys July 13th, same day as our first workshop, which was a virtual workshop on Zoom. And then the following week, we had an in-person workshop at 4 Mile House. And then we, as I mentioned, have office hours. We've done 3 of them so far. We have 1 more currently scheduled for next Tuesday at the Virginia Village Library. The idea for these is to give an opportunity for folks who have questions, who want to come talk to the planning team about some of the draft recommendations, to meet with the planning team. And then also we're just set up in these locations to help spread the word around the plan and encourage folks to take the surveys. Councilman Cashman, you have a question?
Yes, Scott. I heard from a constituent that if you want to take all 4 surveys, it takes about an hour. And I'm wondering if that length of time is discouraging people, and if there's a way to simplify and make it more user-friendly.
Yeah, great question. And that's something we struggled with in putting these surveys together is we want to, be transparent and share as much information as possible, while also making the surveys, relatively easy to complete and get through. So we tried to balance how much information we were putting in there to make them so that they weren't super long. They easily could have been longer,
Sure.
while also including enough information that when we next release the draft plan, people aren't feeling blindsided that
Yeah,
there wasn't a whole bunch of information we didn't share. Yeah.
do we have the ability to determine, people who log on and do part of the survey and then don't finish? Do we have that capability?
Yeah, I think we can see how many people start versus how many people complete the survey.
I'd be real interested in that info to see if we might need to consider a different approach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Paul, I'd be one of those people that started and then stopped. And clearly I'm invested in it, but if we have time at the end, I have some thoughts on that. But I agree, and I wouldn't be surprised if we haven't seen a huge response rate or completion rate of those surveys.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we're open to ideas for how to improve that usability so that more people will take them and complete them. So yeah, we'll reserve some time to talk more about that later in the meeting. We've also done a few events and have a few more upcoming. So we were at National Night Out at Cook Park last week. Saw a few of you there. And then we will be at South by Southeast coming up, not this weekend, but the following weekend at Bible Park. And then we've done a couple food truck events. And the purpose of these is to try to get to some of the renters. As we've talked about previously, that's the sort of the biggest group that we know we're not hearing from is the renters in the area. So we are holding these in areas near the apartments and trying to spread the word around among the surrounding apartment buildings to get people to come. And if they come participate in our activities, we give them a voucher for free food from the food truck. So we did one on July 23rd. We had decent turnout near Jacobs Park. And then we've got one more coming up near sort of Mexico and just east of Colorado, near those apartments, sort of behind the Best Buy. And we may be looking at another one potentially. And then we're also trying to get into some school events. We just this afternoon found out we got into one coming up at McMean, I think next week. But we'd like to participate in, or at least get the word out at, upcoming back to school nights or anything like that at the schools. So if any of you have contacts at the schools your kids go to or know of any events coming up, please let us know, because we really like to use those to, again, help spread the word or potentially participate in those events to get feedback directly. And then remaining process, we're planning on keeping this phase going at least through the end of the month, probably into early September. And then we'll, if we've gotten a good enough response on them, we'll close down the surveys and take those results and use those to update those draft recommendations, select the preferred alternatives, do all that stuff I was just talking about, put all that into a draft plan document that we will then share back with the community later this year, maybe November-ish if things stay on schedule. Again, give the community an opportunity to review that draft plan, provide feedback on it, tell us how to improve it. We'll take that feedback, make those updates and improvements to the draft plan before going through the adoption process. Again, starting early next year and wrapping up in the first half of 2023. So we were talking about trying to get folks to take the survey. One of the things we're doing a few things, including Councilman Cashman's office, is putting additional mailers out to all the properties in near Southeast. So we really appreciate him taking the lead on that. But we have also ordered some yard signs that we're going to try to put up in parks and along trails, but also we would really appreciate any of you steering committee members, if you'd like to take one and putting it in your yard. If you've got friends and neighbors that would be willing to put them in their yard as well. So this is what the yard sign will look like. They're being printed right now. We'll have them early next week, hopefully. So if you're willing to take one, please let me know. We can deliver it to you and you can put it in your yard. If you want to take multiples and give them to your neighbors, that would also be great. So please let us know. We're going to have these to distribute. And these can be used for both phases coming up. We won't need to update these for the following phases. So these should be good for the rest of the planning process. So
Hey,
that's
Scott,
Jason.
sorry to interrupt, Scott.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat, and I think it's a good one. Dustin is asking how would a steering committee member go about getting one of these signs? So you want to talk a little bit about distribution?
Yeah, just let us know if you're willing to take one and we can come deliver it to you, or if there's a better way you would like to get them, let us know. But we're happy to come drop them off wherever you would like to get them. Yeah, great. Looks like a few folks are already saying they're interested. So we will, once we have them, we'll coordinate with you on getting them to you. Any other questions on process or project status or what's coming up? All right, cool. So now we're going to dive into some of these issues. So I'm going to give a bit of background information on these, including what's in the draft recommendations and some other information. And then have a few questions that we'd like some feedback on, but if anything else sparks as we go through these things that you want to ask about or talk about, feel free. They're not intended to be highly directed conversations. We really want to get your feedback on some of these and how we can improve what we're proposing at this point and make sure that the steering committee is okay with it. So looking at Colorado Station, again, the area, this is going to be mostly focused on what we call the wedge, which is the area just south of the station between the tracks and Evans and between Colorado and I-25, where the RTV park and ride is, the freeway forward, the public storage, things like that. So currently most of that is zoned for up to 20 stories, which could actually go up to 30 stories under the new enhancing affordable housing program. So if people provide additional affordable housing over the base that's required, they could get up to 30 stories, again, under the existing zoning. What we've heard from the community is that they would like to see some additional growth directed to this area, as long as it comes with additional amenities, including affordable housing, more retail and entertainment options, additional plazas or open space, and also comes with improved accessibility and safety. So we've been working with RTD on some proposals on how we could achieve this, because again, they control a large chunk of that. So we have some recommendations in the draft recommendation surveys, if you've gotten that far in the land use survey, talking about implementing a street grid, encouraging additional uses, and creating plazas and community gathering spaces, and then also aligning the streets on either side of Evans, improving pedestrian and bike connections, and some other accessibility and safety improvements. So like I said, we've been working with RTD. They've put together a sort of draft proposal of how this could look. This will be probably more detailed than what will actually end up in the plan document, but we want to take some of the principles from this and put them into the recommendations. And also, we don't think this is necessarily perfect. We've been talking with our designers. We definitely think there could be some improvements to this, but we want to share this draft with you and get your feedback on it. So this is what RTD has put together. So again, this is Evans down here, the tracks, the platform right here. The shaded area is the RTD property, so the tracks and the parking lot currently. And so what they're proposing is connecting Asbury through to Birch, realigning Birch so that it connects directly across Evans, and also connecting Bel Air and Ash directly across, and creating sort of 3 blocks here, developable blocks on the current park and ride site. One of them would be a parking garage to accommodate the spots that would go away, the service spots that would go away. And then that leaves sort of 2 fully developable blocks. Councilwoman Black.
Thanks. I have not seen this before, so I have to think about it, but I do think it's sort of ironic that we're making the Colorado Station more car oriented by putting more streets in there for cars. So I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah, it's a fair point. But we think about the streets as not just for cars, right? They also provide sidewalks and bike facilities, and
Why
also
not?
provide that structure that we need to build around, right? So and we can have conversations with RTD about the amount of parking there, although from my understanding, pre-pandemic, that parking lot was always full during the days. I think that's less so now, but as things come back, that may change again. But yeah, we're happy to have a conversation about how car-centric this type of development should be.
I would imagine it could be, given all the presumably office spaces and residential areas, most of them would be better off as like pedestrian malls as opposed to roads like Kendra said, with just a main road to access the parking lot.
Yeah, and I know that's something Jason, when we were first talking about this, we had talked about some of these being just pedestrian and bike connections instead of full-blown roads. So like I said, this is still a work in progress, and yeah, any feedback like this is really appreciated. And then this area right here would be a plaza space or an open space. So we've got a few more sort of renderings. So this is looking southwest, basically as if you're coming down that the bike bridge over I-25 on the north side of the station. So this would be that plaza, this would be the parking garage, and then what they're showing here are 11-story buildings. So here's another view, again, looking sort of southwest, same sort of direction, the station, plaza, parking garage, and then potential developments. And now looking southeast. It would also come with some rerouting of the bus routes, where those stops would be in Colorado Station to make them a little more efficient, instead of going all the way to the north side of the station where they are now, or stopping on Evans. Christopher.
Is this just a kind of high-level planning document, or does RTD really have a vision to really make a change? And if so, what's the timing of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is still a fairly high-level planning document, but I think RTD does have some interest or willingness to contemplate this. They've been approached by potential developers for part of their park and ride property. So that's part of what has spurred their interest in it, is that they've sort of received a proposal. So they're interested in exploring how that could work, if they could accommodate that and still maintain their parking. So this is, yeah, certainly not set in stone, not even close to that. That's why we want feedback on it. And the timing of it could be, anywhere between the next couple of years to, several years down the road, depending on sort of the interest from partners in developing this with RTD. See, Jim, I think Scott Caldwell had his hand up first.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for that. Back when we did our original design and plan for Colorado Center, we had a lot of discussion with the city and with RTD about Bel Air Street as maybe a connection through that site onto our site, since we already have a road and a connection sort of established there. Has that been contemplated in this? And I'm curious as to why the Birch Street would be the alignment there versus Bel Air.
Yeah, I know we've had that conversation. Jason, do you have more details on why we ended up on Birch instead of Bel Air?
Yeah, a great question, Scott. So as part of the conversation, it certainly was contemplated, and ultimately what it has come down to, at least from what we're hearing, is it comes down to cost, right? So it would cost quite a bit of money to, essentially move the bridge that exists at Birch and kind of replace it at Bel Air Street. So that's ultimately kind of the extent of what we've heard in terms of why you're not seeing Bel Air Street punch through. We certainly, from a planning perspective, it makes sense. You can, just looking at this aerial, you can see that, it makes sense to just have Birch line up with kind of what's going on north of the tracks there, but it ultimately has come down to cost, and that's at least what we're hearing.
Okay.
And so I guess the second part of that is the alignment of Birch Street. This is something that's obviously been contemplated quite a bit. It's a little bit awkward over there, and I think again, as Scott said, this isn't the end all be all. It's very conceptual, but I think the idea is to make these parcels, ensure that they are developable. And so, giving maybe a little bit of extra room to a particular parcel down there. And then all this is, of course, unknown with, what the current, I think it's still called the Freeway Ford. It's the Ford dealership there, kind of what their future looks like as well. So it's still very kind of, up in the air, but the idea is to kind of, at least make sure that Birch Street north of Evans lines up with Birch Street south of Evans. So that's kind of why it's a little bit of a weird jaunt there.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Adrian, I think you were next.
There'll be a two quick part there. Scott, can you make some of these available offline besides just the recorded view to look at, just to kind of mull over in time for this redevelopment station area?
Yeah, definitely. We'll post this whole presentation on the website
Okay.
next week or so.
Perfect. And then the other one, has Freeway Ford decided what they want to do? I mean, are they on RTD land, or do they own their own parcel that they have to sell then?
Yeah, they own their own parcel. So yeah, this is showing eating into their property, as well as, on the other side, it's showing Asbury blasting right through the public storage, as well as a few other properties. So this is definitely impacting some private property.
Okay. Do we know status of any of their willingness or wanting to sell and or be part of this?
Yeah, we don't have anything concrete. I've heard rumors that Freeway Ford is interested in moving. Have not really heard anything about public storage. But so, that's something we need to continue the conversations with the property owners in the area. And then, as this evolves, we need to make sure that, it accommodates development on or redevelopment on those properties and makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
I think Councilman Cashman was next, and then I'll get to you, Jim.
Well, I already spoke once. Why don't you go to Jim first?
Okay.
when
Yep,
he's
go ahead,
done.
Jim.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me okay, Scott?
Yeah.
Good, thanks. Scott, if I'm remembering correctly from about 5 minutes and 3 slides ago, we saw that rendering of the area. Yeah, thank you. You said that space is eligible or could be up to 20 stories. The rendering here is about 10 or 11. Who, what, and when will determine how high those buildings are?
That would be up to, well, it would, at this point, it would be basically up to whoever develops it, that they could come in, and anything up to that 20 or even potentially 30, if they provide that additional affordable housing, could be, it would be up to them what, they have that by right at this point. So if they came in and applied for a building that tall and they met all the other requirements, they could build that. We have an opportunity to provide additional guidance on that. Down zoning properties, reducing existing entitlements is always a tricky conversation, so we typically avoid that. But if that's something the community and the steering committee and the council members feel strongly about, that's something we could look at. But like I said, it's usually something we avoid. So at this point, we're not really proposing additional height. That's 20 stories is the tallest zone district that we could apply here. So we're not looking at increasing that entitlement. And again, we're not really looking at decreasing it. So it would be up to whoever decides to develop it, how tall they want to go within that range.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Councilman.
Yeah, Scott, my blood runs cold looking at that density along an Evans Avenue. It just does. It makes a logical spot at one level for density. And I know it's at a rail station, but the level of density we're talking about is going to be a hell of a lot of cars. And to recommend this level of entitlement sitting in a plan that people are going to take to the bank without some sort of plan on how Evans could ever function with the added level, I find very difficult.
Yeah, I hear you. And, obviously we've had our conversations about Evans, and we're still working on figuring that out. Hopefully we'll have an answer from Dottie soon for you on the Evans corridor study. And then, as I was just talking about with Jim, that's the existing entitlement, and even the existing entitlement is taller than it is here. So even without this plan, somebody could come in and put this amount of density in. Like I said, if we want to talk about reducing that entitlement, we can start having that conversation, but it's a very tricky conversation to have. And then the other side of it is putting the infrastructure in place to accommodate that, right? And again, we've talked about Evans, and there's other things besides just Evans that we would need to be thinking about to make sure we can support that level of density. And part of it is improving the broader network. So, getting back to Councilwoman Black's question at the beginning, why do we want to put additional streets in? Again, it provides additional connections so that everybody is not funneled onto Evans and Colorado necessarily at the same location. By providing some internal connections, people can get around within the development without having to go to the surrounding streets. And if we extend those connections across those streets, they can get into the broader neighborhood again without having to rely on Evans and Colorado. So yeah, like I said, I hear you, and we can continue to talk about both the infrastructure needs to support additional development of whatever size or type happens here, and then if you want, we can talk additionally about what the appropriate level of intensity is on these properties.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think Councilwoman Black was up next. You're still on mute, Councilwoman.
It looks like she's
Okay.
having some, oh, there she is.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, my mouse wasn't working for a minute. I just wanted to say a couple things. So for Paul Cashman and anybody else who might be freaked out about this is very aspirational. There are no plans to do this. Everything I've heard is Freeway Forward has absolutely no interest in selling. And it's very complicated apparently to move a car dealership. You have to get the approval of the car dealership god or something. I don't know. And then the public storage, you have that going partially away too. And I have also heard that company, which is a huge national company, what I've heard is they have never sold a piece of property ever. And they've been around for decades and decades. So, whether we like this or not, I just think, it's not likely. I know there is a developer interested in building a 100% affordable building in the parking lot there, which is really one of the reasons we started really getting into this conversation. So, that is something that could possibly happen. But as far as the rest of it, I would not think that anything would likely to be happening in the near future. I call that a reality check. I'm giving a reality check. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I think Adrian was next and then Jim.
Yeah, it was just kind of seconding off of Paul's, because obviously, if it does get close to even half of this, the Cameron's right there as well, which is adding a whole bunch of new car and traffic to that. And then folks that are coming to also the new development at Evans and Monaco, maybe coming off of 25, not just coming from the east side over. So they're going to be using that same interchange to go to all the new apartments down at Monaco and Evans as well. So same kind of concern of nice to see kind of idea wise, but that's going to get a pretty insanely used intersection with the, potentially two large buildings, Cameron, and the new ones down at Monaco and Evans.
Yeah, and again, that's, why we need the plan to make the improvements to the infrastructure to handle the growth that's already coming and potentially could come in the future. All right, Jim, I think was next.
Right behind council people, Black and Cashman, we've already got 424 unit apartment complex going up at Monaco and Evans. That's 1 mile east of what we're looking at right here. That'll put at least 424 more cars on Evans at that juncture. I'm curious to know, I totally agree with Kendra and Paul and everybody else that's looking at this and thinking, you got to be kidding me in terms of putting this where it's located. Scott, who is in this? Where did this rendering come from? Why does this even exist at this point?
Yeah, this was put together by RTD. So again, as Councilwoman Black said, they were approached by someone interested in building an affordable development on that parking lot. So it sort of spurred this conversation of, all right, if we want to look at redeveloping the parking lot, how should or could that work? So we've been working with RTD over the last few months to examine this, and then this is what RTD put together as sort of a proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Scott.
Yeah, so looking at this from this angle, it's definitely reminding me of our walkthrough here. And when the way structured parking basically right across from the bridge at the station, you just walk out of the station here like straight into a wall. So I think if something were to happen in that area and redeveloping that, it would be nicer to have something more activated, like we were talking about, to kind of bring the station into the rest of the grid there. And just also as a side note about comment, I think it could help also to push the structured parking to the street, so then all those trips aren't going through the development. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with you. That is exactly the conversation we had when we first saw this, that we're not really happy with where they're proposing the structure and think it would probably work better along Evans for exactly those reasons. So great comments. Dustin.
Yeah, I guess just a slightly counter view. I guess conceptually, I think it's a great idea. I mean, traffic's gonna be an issue. It doesn't matter where we put more density. But if we're gonna put density somewhere, why not put it right on top of a train line? Maybe it's a little bit more, considerate of all the other comments. But I mean, if we're gonna increase density, this makes more sense than across the road from Bible Park, where there is no public transport.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hearing your comments around this level of development at this location, I wanted to sort of pause and maybe talk a bit more about the appropriate levels of growth, because we've sort of had this conversation abstractly over the last 6 months or so of where should we be directing growth and where should that be. And a lot of the conversation has been sort of along the corridors near or in these centers near transit, exactly as Dustin was saying. And then we share this this potential development again, with all of the caveats that Councilwoman Black shared. That whatever happens here, it's not going to look exactly like this, but this level of development at some point in the next 20 years is somewhat feasible in this area. And so hearing some of the concerns about that, and again, especially noting that the existing entitlement on this is even greater than what this is showing. Do we need to sort of take a step back and think about how much growth we should be directing to the corridors and to the centers in this part of town? Because again, that's sort of the direction we thought we had gotten from, again, the community and from you all, that's where we wanted to direct the growth to places like this that are served by transit. But now that we're seeing what that could potentially look like, I totally understand folks. When you see it, it's different than talking about it sort of conceptually or theoretically. So any thoughts on do we need to sort of rethink our broader growth goals for New Southeast at this point? Christopher.
And I hear everybody's concern on the density, and I think what we're trying to plan for is really people are going to keep coming. How's the city take that on? So I kind of take it as it's less of a comment to density, but more to how can our infrastructure be improved to take on the density. I think that's the part that's a little missing here, that I think if there's a potential solution to Evans and Colorado and reinserting a grid, whatever it might be, I think that might be the one missing piece. That I understand we're not doing all that right now, but I think having a high level solution to how that could work might ease some concerns. It's not going to ease everybody's concerns to the density, but I think that's one of my questions just in this intersection of how can it take this on, and there's got to be a plan around how that could work.
Yeah, definitely, and we're working on that. But yeah, that's a great point. Dustin.
Yeah, I guess to your point, Scott, and this kind of came up, I noticed at least when we had the virtual session last month with some of the recommendations there and the draft recommendation. I felt that there was a very strong emphasis on not kind of maintaining the status quo. And even when we had the mini breakout sessions and before that, there was a lot of people concerned about effectively the status quo. And I think with the way the survey is, and like I said, I gave up because there was a lot of words and a lot of big decisions, and it wasn't particularly user-friendly. I do want to get back to it, but I need to, like Paul said, set up a good hour or more so I know I can actually do it justice. But I think, part of it is, visuals like this is, hey, this is what it would look like, as well as, we've been doing this for a year now, had a lot of discussions on the future needs of the community and say, yes, all right, well, this seems like a terrible idea now, but it's inevitable. Whether we want it to happen or not, like you said, this could be 30 stories high. If someone wanted to do it, we're kind of powerless to stop it at this point. So I think it's kind of a combination of, I think there needs to be a happy medium, and how do we incorporate that into the draft plan? But at the same time, how do we kind of, one, visualize it so people understand what it is, but at the same time, well, we're going to need this, so how do we do it in the least imposing way possible?
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Councilman.
Yeah, I want to be very clear. I'm not objecting to density. I just, at some point, we have to understand what our transportation system can handle. And so now we're doing these great pictures, and I understand it's, it's a placeholder, what might happen on this spot. But to have these placeholders without any similar thing about how our transportation system might function at a time when our bus line is as close to impotent as I've ever seen it. Denver, not yet, with a transportation department that's really aggressive. It just feels so cart before the horse here. And I know we've talked, Scott, but it just really does. So to have a plan where we're going to be showing all these potential developments with no clue how we would move people. So there you go. Last time I will spout that this evening.
Yeah, thanks. I want to push back just a little bit, that I don't think we have no clue, right? I totally get that we don't have the things in place to achieve the mobility we need to adequately support development like this. But I think we do have an idea, and part of this plan will be furthering that idea for how to accomplish that. And then we need additional tools like the corridor study we've been talking about to really flesh that out. And then we need the money to implement it. So I hear you, and I agree. I just want to give us a little more credit that I think we have the beginnings of an idea at least.
Well, I'm not seeing a picture of it. I'm starting to see pictures of development that we're going to present to a community, a large portion of which is concerned about existing development.
Right.
And I only think it's in our best interest to be able to put it on paper, same way as we're doing this.
That I totally agree with, and we are working on that. We're getting maps, and we're going to start working on renderings of the mobility improvements and safety improvements and things like that. So that is an excellent point, and I hear you on that, and we're working on it. All right, Adrian.
Mine's gonna kind of go to Paul's too. I also want to clarify again, no, we're all on board for density, and this is agreed that kind of the best spot to do something this intense for density, as you are on top of 25 in the light rail station. I go right back to Paul's point of again, we got the Cameron there. I forgot we also got the ones right by our house at Holly and Evans too, with 180 new townhomes that are coming in there. So you've got 2 cars per household for those. Then the ones down the street there that, yeah, these are probably the most appropriate spots for them. But yeah, how do you handle the kind of all at once the traffic that's going to come. Plus, most of that corner is still unincorporated Denver. So there's a whole bunch of slot homes that are still being allowed because it's Arapahoe County right across from the Cameron there. So there's double density going in there for just single family attached homes. So same with Paul, a lot of cart before horse just feelings of, again, we're redeveloping Evans in a quick gas station faction instead of much else. But a lot of traffic is going to be coming this way and what to do about it.
Okay, thanks. Spencer, I think you're next.
Yeah, sorry, my hand was up before Councilmember Cashman and everyone else started talking, so I'm probably beating a dead horse now. But yeah, I was just going to say, I know there's a lot of development in that area. I mean, you've already got that other apartment complex going there at 25 in Evans. I believe there's another apartment complex going in at Colorado and Evans, right, pushing towards the BU side as well, or not Colorado and Evans, but Colorado and like just north of Evans. And yeah, and I think, like they were saying, coming with a plan for like how we're going to address what this would do to Evans would definitely help smooth things out. But my concern is that it's been reiterated in this meeting over and over again that the focus is never going to be on like car traffic mitigation, in the sense that you're not going to address the roads for more cars. You're going to address the roads to fix like for bus routes and RTD, which is all totally understandable and I fully support. But these developments are going to be bringing more cars to Evans. There's going to be more traffic on Evans via single passenger vehicle, or like one individual vehicle. But yeah, again, I'm probably beating a dead horse at this point, but yeah.
No, yeah, you bring up a couple of good points. I think one is that, yeah, you're right. Over on the other side of Colorado, where the La Quinta is or was, there's a proposed development there as well. And then, yeah, you're right. We should be, honest about what our potential steps are in terms of improving mobility, and that, it's city policy not to add lanes, right? We're not going to be widening Evans to accommodate additional traffic, and there's good reasons for not doing that. Mostly that we add lanes and it just fills up and it doesn't actually improve mobility or congestion. It just puts more cars on the road. It doesn't actually hurt anybody. So yeah, we're looking at other ways to improve mobility, encouraging folks to use the transit here, and how can we make it safer and easier to get to that so people can take it. How can people walk or bike to their destinations? But also part of it is, putting in these other street connections and better building out the network, so that, again, as we talked about, these new people, when they do drive, and the existing folks, when they do drive, their only option is not getting on Evans or getting on Colorado, that there are, there's a network of streets that they can use to get around. And I know, when we talk about that, then there's raises the concern about, just more traffic in neighborhoods. So we need to pair that with, traffic calming and safety improvements within the neighborhood, so that we're not getting just people speeding through the neighborhoods to avoid the congestion on Evans and Colorado. So it's all of these issues all together. And as I'm hearing from you, presenting just, all right, here's 12-story buildings, what do you think about this, without talking about all of these other issues together is doing a disservice. And certainly when we talk to the community about this, we need to do a better job of tying all of these issues together. So I'm hearing you loud and clear on that. And we will, as we move forward on this conversation with you and the community, we will do a better job of tying these issues together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that. I'm sure y'all will, get that messaging across. It is something I've witnessed, though, from like the Virginia Village Community Association and stuff, is like there is that concern that you're talking about, that everyone's talking about, of that density without really addressing Evans,
right,
to like handle that density.
Right. Yeah, definitely. All right, I think Councilwoman Black was next.
Oh, Jared hasn't spoken, so please let Jared go first.
Let's go with Jared.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna defer to Jim, but I'm gonna say Jim's next. He's got the actual hand up, not the virtual hand up.
He
Mine
had-
is mine's super quick, and it's just an input on the amount of visceral response of seeing real pictures on real property is so much more impactful than all the other photos that we've used in all of the other surveys. And I would just say, I don't know how you do drawings. That is well outside of my pay grade, but more drawings over our existing neighborhood, I think will help people begin to imagine what we're talking about, both in built, use, land use, mobility, all of that. Thinking about all the pictures that we've shown people so far, they're like imaginary places, not in their neighborhood. And I've just been listening in for the last hour. There's been more there's been more conversation about these pictures than anything that we've ever shown. And I think it's just because people actually feel something when they see their neighborhood. And so I would just encourage, go with the energy, positive and negative, but try to figure out, can we pay more people to do more real drawings of our neighborhoods is my feedback for the night. Because as the phrase goes, a picture carries 1,000 words.
Yeah, I hear you on that. All right, so it was Jim next and then Councilwoman Black. Someone. All right, go ahead, Jim.
All right, thanks. Scott, here's a wild card factoid to toss in. And I throw this into you from your position of potential influence, okay? According to an article that I read recently from one of our venerable publications, people have stopped moving to Denver. It's at a standstill, okay? So my point is that I don't think that necessarily high density development is necessary unless some body or some entity is advocating for it. If people are not moving here right now, and by the way, the reason for that is that nobody can afford to live here other than those of us that are already here. Pictures like what we're seeing right now may never ever have to become a reality. So if people are stopping moving to Denver, we're not expanding, we're not growing, and this is a statistic as of recent. What we're talking about here may never have to come to fruition. And I know this is kind of an offbeat throw in, but I'd just like to toss that in right now.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. You raised an interesting point, but I think, as you were saying, there is sort of this chicken and egg problem, right? The reason it's so expensive is that there's not enough housing, and so we're saying we shouldn't build more housing because people aren't moving here because it's so expensive. That is, just a self-reinforcing negative cycle of disinvestment, and that's how you get cities like Detroit, right? And we don't want to be like that. So I would argue that we do need to keep adding housing, even if people aren't moving here right now, because we expect people to move here as we improve the affordable housing situation. And I think also, looking at our Blueprint Denver citywide plan, we talk about wanting to attract a larger share of the regional growth. And a lot of that has to do with sustainability, that by giving people the option to live in a place like this next to transit, where they can walk across the street to natural grocers, that is a more sustainable way of living than these people living out in Aurora, where they have to drive everywhere. And so it's better for the planet, it's better for our regional community, it's better for the local community if we can accommodate additional growth in locations like this, where we have at least some of the infrastructure in place. Obviously, there's a lot of improvements that needed, but we have a $1 billion investment in the light rail here that we should be capitalizing on. So thank you for raising that point, and that's certainly a viewpoint that we hear and I respect. But I think we and our citywide plans say we do still want to be adding housing in the city going forward. All right, Councilwoman Black.
Thanks, Scott. I agree with everything you just said. And Jim also wanted to elaborate on what Scott said. Even if people stop moving here at such high rates. We already have a housing shortage, and that is why housing is expensive. It's basic supply and demand, and we have to put it somewhere. And if we don't put it at a light rail station or a corridor, we're going to continue building suburban sprawl, which we are. And all those people who live in those far-reaching suburbs, they drive to Denver. They don't have the option of traveling any other way. And then sprawl is terrible for the environment. I know Scott just said this, but it's terrible for the environment, and it does bring more cars. They don't have the option of riding their bike or taking the light rail. So all of our regional planning has made plans to have density at light rail stations, just so people have the option. So I am one of the people that supports density at light rail station and on commercial corridors. A lot of people in my district live in older apartment buildings and older homes, but both are in neighborhoods where there's a lot more space, and it's something that people like. And so I'm not supportive of changing those neighborhoods, but I am supportive of density on light rail stations and on corridors, because it has to go somewhere. So those are the choices in your neighborhood, you know, way out in Adams County or way out in Elbert County, or do you want it here? So also, we have to realize that one of the priorities for our city and for this group was housing. And so if you want to make your decisions, you know, for houses for people or cars for people, I choose housing. And it is unfortunate that we have a lot of people and they are still driving their cars. I did drive my car today. But I would rather have people housed than make plans trying to avoid traffic jams. I think Scott talked about induced demand. And one thing traffic engineers will tell you is when you widen streets and add lanes, it doesn't solve a traffic jam. It just more people go on the road. And that's what happened with I-25, and it happens all over the world. So I just wanted to make those points. And then again, this plan we have here is not really reality. And so I don't think you should include it in what we're presenting to the public. And if there ever comes a time when, you know, development may happen here, the city would work with a developer and with RTD on a plan. We have something called large development review, and I'm sure this would qualify for that. And we would do something much more thoughtful than these, you know, white, whatever they are, horizontal illustrations. So I do know that if someday something does happen here, it would be done much more thoughtfully and not this presentation, which makes it look really ugly and intimidating. And then I'm going to shut up, and I'm switching my device because I'm switching locations. So I'll be back with you in a moment. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councilwoman. Yeah. And on that final point that, yeah, I think as I mentioned right at the beginning that you know, we're not going to put these graphics in the plan, but what we want to do is sort of extract the principles of this or what we like, what the community likes, what you all like about this, and put that into the plan. So the additional connections, the plaza, open space, activation at the station platform, all these things that we've talked about that you do like or that you would like to see that aren't shown here. Those are the things that will be in the plan, so that when somebody does, whenever they come forward with a proposal, exactly as Councilwoman Black said, they go through a process called large development review. And that's when we pull in all these plan recommendations and say, all right, we have a plan that says you need to do X, Y, and Z. And so here are all the changes you need to make to your proposal to accommodate that. So that's why we need to get it into this plan. But again, it won't be exactly what you're seeing here, what's in the plan or what is eventually built whenever that happens. All right. So I think I got the feedback I needed on that. I really appreciate the conversation on that. That was really great. I appreciate everyone's candidness and forthcoming conversation on that. So I think that's great. I have a feeling we'll have some strong feelings on this next one as well. And Councilwoman Black gave us a bit of a segue on this. So now shifting from the centers and corridors where we are expecting to see a lot of the growth, now looking at the residential single unit areas and saying, how should those areas accommodate some additional growth as well? So again, Blueprint Denver, our citywide land use and transportation plan, calls for allowing ADUs everywhere in the city eventually. As we've talked about, we need to make some updates to those rules before they're appropriate in this part of town, but we're working on making those updates now. So eventually we'll want to allow ADUs throughout near Southeast, and then also incorporating options for missing middle housing into every neighborhood. So every neighborhood needs to accommodate some missing middle housing. And there will eventually be a citywide project similar to the expanding housing affordability one or the ADUs in Denver one that we've talked about that will implement that citywide. But this is our opportunity to provide some guidance on that, how it should happen in near Southeast, the types of things that we would like to see before that, whether that's infrastructure improvements or design guideline improvements or things like that. And also looking at opportunities for how we can potentially accommodate some additional housing before that citywide project comes to fruition, which will be several years down the line. And so we've heard from the community that there is some interest in new housing options, again, where they fit in scale-wise, where we have the infrastructure to support them, and where we'll actually improve affordability, while at the same time trying to preserve the look and feel of these neighborhoods. So I'm going to go through some of the draft recommendation language and then talk a little more about some of the sort of tension that we could see between wanting improved affordability, additional housing options, and preservation of look and feel or better design. So before I do that, it looks like Dustin has his hand up.
Yeah, I might have jumped in too early on this one, but I think I'm going to say it now because this goes back to the thing in July where I guess as a group we've seen these kind of bullet points before and discussed them. When I saw the drafts on July, that was one of those ones where I was like, oh, the way I'm interpreting this draft, which is presumably I've seen this one before, it sounds like the whole Southeast is going underneath like Krishna Park historic design thing where, everything will keep the current look. And if we do anything, it must keep the current look. And it seemed to me at the time very strongly worded in that regard. And I feel like we, as a steering committee, weren't that strong on it. I know there was some community input where they no, I want to keep the feel, but at the same time we had the bias training before where it's like, well, that's coded language for certain things as well. And if we keep the feel, how do we get that middle housing in? So that's something I noticed from that session. And also I'm just kind of curious about how much, there's us as a steering committee, there's a lot of community outreach as well. But again, in those sessions, they were like, oh, I want to keep everything exactly as it is. And it's like, okay, well, as someone who saw the sign and decided to join the Zoom session, that was their single issue they wanted to make sure was reinforced. How does that direct or redirect this entire process?
Yeah, and that is exactly what I want to be talking about here. So let me go through this stuff and then yeah, we can talk more about that, because that it wasn't intended to be that strong that nothing should change in terms of the look and feel. But we want to balance that with these other desires, right? That we have these, and so that's what I'll talk about. So let me go through these slides, and then I think we'll talk about exactly what you are asking about. So this is our draft language around missing middle. So again, consistent with our citywide guidance from adopted citywide plans. We want to expand options for missing middle housing in the single unit residential areas. And again, that's buildings between 2 and 19 units is how we define it. So things like duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, even up to small apartment buildings. Again, up to about 19 units. Making sure that when they're added, they fit in with that character and also promote affordability. And if you've taken the survey, you've seen we have a few options in there about different ways we could do this. And so we're trying to get feedback, and that's where we can provide those options ahead of that future citywide project in certain areas. So we don't necessarily have to do any or all of those, but there may be locations where some of those options are appropriate. And so that's where we want to get the feedback from the community on. And then ADUs, accessory dwelling units, again, the guidance from our citywide plans is that they should eventually be allowed everywhere in the city. And so we want to make sure that as they are allowed here in near Southeast, that the design is compatible with the suburban context, that we're using them to improve affordability and compatibility, and again, that those infrastructure and mobility needs. And then also thinking about potential proactive sort of neighborhood-wide rezonings. You may have seen in the news recently, a few neighborhoods around the city have come together, working with their council members to rezone the entire neighborhood to allow ADUs. So some of the recommendations coming out of this could be certain neighborhoods or parts of neighborhoods should be sort of proactively rezoned all at once to allow ADUs. Getting into those design issues that we want to improve the design guidelines or requirements for new buildings and additions to houses in these neighborhoods so that future development fits in. And mostly what we've heard about that is the scale. The current zoning has a pretty generous building envelope, much bigger than what the existing houses typically are. And so that if people add on or scrape the house and build a new one, it can be much bigger and out of context than what is surrounding it. And so making some changes to those zoning requirements so that the scale, the location on the lot, the size of it fits in a little better. But also looking to improve sustainability and reduce energy and water use in new development. So increasing the requirements for those. And then talking about preservation in some areas, looking at additional preservation tools like a landmark district or a conservation overlay, which is what Crescenta Park has, which again provides even more detailed and stricter zoning guidelines for what can be built. So it really fits in with the existing character. Not that these would be applied everywhere, but certain locations, certain subdivisions within these neighborhoods could be appropriate for those tools if the property owners in those locations are interested in pursuing those. And then outside of those specific tools, otherwise just encouraging folks to preserve their house as opposed to demolishing it and building something new. It's more sustainable that way. It helps promote affordability, reduces waste, things like that. So we want programs that encourage that, even if it doesn't have landmark designation or anything like that. And then also looking to improve affordability using a variety of sort of citywide programs and for both renters and homeowners in these neighborhoods. And part of that is making sure that these existing, still somewhat relatively affordable houses can be maintained that way. And related to that, preventing involuntary displacement. So looking at programs that can help folks stay in their houses, whether that's property tax discounts or help with renovation and remodel and things like that. So looking at ways to help folks keep in their houses. So getting into sort of the potential tension between some of these recommendations, and this gets to what Dustin was talking about, that if we have really strong design requirements, whether through zoning or through landmark requirements or things like that, it may limit opportunities for adding new housing, adding ADUs, adding a second unit where appropriate, or increase the cost for doing those things to the point where it potentially becomes prohibitive. Whereas if we focus more on just adding new housing, we may lose some of that design character that people really like in their neighborhoods. It may also result in additional displacement if we really open it up for adding new units that could potentially raise prices for properties to be redeveloped, potentially forcing out some existing residents. Whereas if we really focus on keeping things affordable, we may then see less investment if folks can't get the return they need to invest in adding a second unit because of the affordability limits on it. Maybe they won't do it, so we won't see as many new units being built. So that's where going too far in any direction on one of these could impact the others. So it's about finding a balance before these. We've heard from the community, all of these are important. And I think there's a way to do it so that we can achieve all of these in a way that really benefits the community. But what we want to hear from you is how should we think about balancing these goals? How should we evaluate these trade-offs between these goals? And they don't necessarily have to be the same in each neighborhood or across even an individual neighborhood. Again, there may be parts that we say have more historic value, so that should have a landmark district, which is a stronger control. And there are other areas where we want to focus on adding units or preserving affordability or things like that. So it may be geographic differences, it may be sort of programmatic how we want to balance these things. So that was a lot of text and information I just threw at you. So let me know if you have questions or want to go back to any of that. But that's sort of what we'd like to hear from you is how should we think about balancing these desires that, again, are not necessarily competing, but at least in tension somewhat. So back to Dustin.
I'll be quick this time. So I think the last point about maybe varying by neighborhood certainly makes sense. At least right now, it was a very broad overarching statement in terms of keeping the aesthetic in neighborhoods. Again, I can understand that for the mid-century moderns in Virginia Village, but the 1940s, 50 ranches in Virginia Village, maybe not so much. Even the ranches in our neighborhood, they're fine, but a ranch at the end of the day is just a rectangle with a pitch roof. There's nothing, architecturally amazing about them. So I think if there are certain neighborhoods that want that, fine. I don't know, it should be a blanket one. And I guess my other question kind of related to that is I can think of a few examples between, Goldsmith and Virginia Village where there have been some scrapes and new ones put in or additions added. Erica just did a very nice addition that meets the neighborhood, but is not necessarily like, oh, that might have come out of 1968. But in Virginia Village, I know of another 2-story scrape that went in a few years back, and it's not a ranch, it's not a mid-century modern, but it doesn't seem out of place. It's a little bit more modern. It looks nice, especially around surrounded by the other ones. But then a few blocks down, there are some older scrapes where it's like, okay, this was an interesting choice to put here. So, how do you go, what's the balance between, all right, well, that one certainly doesn't, this one looks like it should be over in Central Park or Lowry or something, whereas this one is like, oh yeah, I can see it's kind of a modern interpretation of what this neighborhood was. So where's that balance, and how do you incorporate that in if that's something we're willing to do?
Yeah, that's exactly the question. I think any additional guidance you could provide us on what you think works or doesn't work about any of these developments that can help us craft the recommendations and ultimately the regulations so that we can get the things that work while not necessarily regulating out some things you might like to see, or not allowing some creativity or things like that, right? We don't want to be too prescriptive so that everything looks the same necessarily, but we want to maintain the things people like while allowing flexibility around the things that maybe people don't have as strong opinions on, or could be altered and still fit in, or things like that. So
Yeah, and I guess maybe I need to reread the draft proposal, but I guess the way I read it right now, it wouldn't allow for any of those instances unless it was, to the architectural style of the era the place was built.
yeah, and that's not the intent. So if that's the way it reads, we need to fix that. So that's good feedback. And then, yeah, one of the things we're working on now is providing a little more detail on it, on what are those sort of specific elements that we think are important, or the community thinks are important, versus the things that can provide that additional flexibility. So we're working on updates to those. And again, any additional feedback you can provide is appreciated. Lisa, I think, was up next.
From just adding to the whole design kind of question, what I've noticed kind of going on in the Virginia Vale area, and I haven't driven it a lot, but there's kind of the move to replace a lot of these smaller bungalows with these mini mansions. And I realize that these owners have a use by right to build to that size. But when we talk about design, those don't fit in either. When you have a neighborhood, I realize that, all these houses can't stay as small bungalows, and our tastes have changed over time. Those aren't really compatible either with many, many neighborhoods. Especially, over time, as they start to take over a neighborhood, the street just gets more dark, and there's no light, and there's no quality of life left. So how do you think that we can incentivize people? Because if you want to build a 5,000 square foot house on a 25 by 125 foot lot, as opposed to doing that and building a duplex, because, maybe you don't, how do we incentivize people to this idea that we want to add more density into the neighborhood? And it doesn't necessarily affect the design as much as taking over a neighborhood with 6,000 square foot homes.
Yeah, great question. And that's exactly the type of stuff we are trying to implement. And so we've made recommendations around similar issues in other plans that we're looking at, adopting for near Southeast. And so it's things like, we can sort of limit the mass of these buildings, right? We have the ability to sort of crank down that building envelope that the existing zoning allows, so that future either scrapes or additions aren't as big. And then we can potentially, offer things like, all right, if you want to do a second unit and you're going to make it affordable, maybe we'll give you a little more room, right? We'll loosen it up a little bit more, not all the way back to what it is now, which is, sort of a free for all almost, but we can, provide a little relief or other incentives. So there are definitely tools within the zoning code that we can use, and then other tools sort of outside the zoning code of encouraging reuse and discouraging scrapes by making it harder to just tear down a house that you have to meet certain requirements for disassembling the house and reusing the waste. Other tools for promoting affordability, things like that. So there's a lot of things we can do, and that we are looking at incorporating into these recommendations. But you're exactly right. Those are the types of things that we are trying to do with these.
Yeah, I just feel that we need to have an incentive for people somehow. Like I said, there are neighborhoods that the housing is very small, and you understand that it's not necessarily either desirable or suitable for a lot of people. But there's a whole world between some of these bungalows and what I see going up when they're scraped.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. Adrian, I think was next.
Yeah, I'll to that, and I send a message to you obviously on the interesting factor of when you kind of look down at the breakdown of the you know, where the duplexes, triplexes, et cetera, were supposed to go based on proximity to some of the main thoroughfares in the survey, the most recent one. A lot of Virginia Village ends up falling in the category of basically everything could be duplex, just where our proximity is really unique. So we have so many triangles of 3 major intersections around us. That just kind of, you know, sparked interesting conversation. You know, does this end up a, you know, 19th and Hooker area by the stadium where it's a dystopian nightmare of every which way, you know, slot home, town home disaster that, you know, before we had the foresight to figure out that maybe we should have a little more control on how these things are built. But kind of to Lisa's point as well too is, you know, how do you, money doesn't buy good design, as we've seen. You know, some of these homes don't, they got all the money in the world and ends up being a giant, you know, 6,000 square foot Tuscan mansion that takes up every buildable size of the lot. And there's a lot of still 550 to 650,000 square foot houses here in the Virginia Vale area that, you know, you could easily put those huge things on. And like Lisa said, there's a huge space between 1,000 square foot and 6,000 square feet. And, you know, they have the right to do so, but how do you kind of guide them to the correct answer of not doing that? Because once you kind of get one on the block, the whole block has to go that way. Otherwise it just turns into a weird smattering, and much like Hilltop, some great ranches there, but now they're all 7,000-10,000 square foot Tuscan ranches instead of some really nice ranches that were sprawling at some point. So I think it's, again, you know, balancing. We, you know, agree. I think the ADUs will really help add density into our areas, but how do you do, you know, without losing an entire neighborhood or subdivision to either duplexes or McMansions? Getting that and threading that needle, I think, is make sure that's covered in our recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right that sort of West Colfax neighborhood was a costly lesson to learn in how we approach that. That we you know, totally opened up the building envelope there, and we just saw that whole neighborhood get sort of wiped out. And
Yeah,
totally
and I think it's
and we don't want to have that to happen here or in other neighborhoods. So
totally, and I think we're at a unique spot here. You know, we can have these conversations that, you know, we all agree density to varying degrees needs to happen. You know, having lost a lot of the Highlands, we lost kind of that West Colfax area. You know, we think we're at a unique spot that we've seen so much happen in the last even just 10 years of, you know, how do we do this better each time? So it's nice to hear everyone's kind of cognizant of the not so great design, but also aware of, you know, we can't stop everything. So how do you kind of usher someone to the right box where they get what they want, but, you know, don't destroy a fabric of a neighborhood type thing.
yeah, you're exactly right. It's finding that sort of sweet spot between not allowing the stuff that's so bad that it really destroys the neighborhood, while still allowing enough flexibility that people can do things like add a second unit, add an ADU. We get some design creativity, you know, as you said, you know, money doesn't necessarily buy taste. So, but that's part of what makes a city interesting, right? That you may not like every building that gets built, every house in your neighborhood may not be to your taste, but that variety to some extent makes the city interesting, right? So we still want to allow for some of that sort of experimentation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a quick side on that one. So, like, for instance, you know, we're looking at Linwood to eventually do some type of KP overlay here. As the new zoning stuff gets pushed in, who supersedes what? So, like, does their overlay supersede the new? These could all be scraped to be duplexes, or does that then? But, you know, which one ends up being the right as things keep evolving here?
Yeah, and that's that's basically what I'm trying to get at now is, right, we can have stricter design requirements like Crisana Park, but that may limit the opportunities for adding a second unit or adding an ADU. And so is that the direction we want to go, or do we want to be a little looser and maybe the design requirements aren't as strict as somewhere like Crisana Park? And so it provides a few more opportunities for more affordability or more housing options. And again, maybe it varies by geography. Maybe, you know, we like Crisana Park and maybe we want to see fewer options and more preservation there, but other parts of Virginia Village, even it's a little looser and we're willing to accept a little more change in the neighborhood, sort of again within that parameter.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're really, KP and Linwood and a couple streets are basically the only ones that have, true design elements that I think, need to have some extra attention to detail. The rest of them, I forget, someone mentioned, they are basically just rectangles with a pitched roof that, I don't think many people would be very upset about if they got scraped or raised or changed. But, if you've got 2 brick ranches and then the classic 4-story duplex between the two, that's when you start getting in trouble of the whole street will have to change at that point, because otherwise everyone's living in the valley of the next door neighbor.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, those are the types of details we're starting to get into, and we want to get additional feedback on, so that we want to see that wholesale change, but could be different scales of change that the community finds acceptable in different locations.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Councilman.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I'd like to go back and talk more about Evans. Just kidding. A couple of things. To be clear, my view is maybe a little bit different than yours, Scott, on the Crescenta Park overlay, because the main thing we're looking to do there is keep that low roof line pitch. And there have been homes add some large additions in the back of the lot. So, I mean, it's a lot looser than a historic district. There's no real requirements on materials and windows, etc. The other thing I wanted to add, for me, at least in my part of the neighborhood, and I'm just north of Crescenta Park, half a block on Elm Street, is big front yards. I think I've told you, Scott, my neighbor across the street, they built the first 2-story on our block. It's actually a pop top, but beautifully designed. It looks like a fully new build, but while it's larger, they didn't try to abuse the space. So you've got that large front lawn, and that alone seems to control the impact of the larger mass. So just wanted to throw that into the discussion.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. One on Crescenta Park, right? That's what's called a conservation overlay, which is not the most restrictive tool we have, which would be a landmark district. So there is some still flexibility with that. And then, the house across the street from you, that's exactly the kind of thing we're trying to get at, is what are the important elements of the character that people like? So is it that front yard space that we really should be focusing on preserving? Is it in Crescenta Park, that low roof line, the thing that we should really be focusing on preserving? And then allowing flexibility on the other things, like, in your neighborhood, you can go up to 2 stories as long as you keep the setbacks. In Crescenta Park, you can go back as long as you keep the low roof line.
Right.
Those are the types of things we're getting into.
Great.
Erica.
So as Dustin said, we just finished a 14-month remodel of our home. We did a pop top renovation, and even though we weren't adding an ADU, we were just increasing the size of our home for our family. I feel like this all is like very much like what I've just lived. So I have a lot to say about it. First of all, as far as kind of building outside of the scale of the neighborhood, just from my experience with our current zoning, I had a very hard time getting my build into the bulk plane that I was allowed. So, and we added a floor on the top of our ranch home. So now we have a 2-story home. And so I feel like, I'm not sure if that's the same outside of Goldsmith, but in my neighborhood, it was very limited what we could do without a variance, which extended the process significantly. So I feel like the odds of there being a 4-story something or other in the middle of a neighborhood would never happen, or a tall duplex. It just would not happen in one of our neighborhoods. Also, I think that, as we were talking about earlier, because we're trying to incentivize people to not go to the burbs, we are wanting to allow these types of improvements. And I think that it really is important to incentivize renovations such as what we just did rather than a scrape. We kept the brick main floor of our build and added an upper floor. So it really kind of, although we painted the brick, which was like, it otherwise fits. We tried really hard to make elements fit into the neighborhood. So to your point, I think that if maybe there could be some approval process or incentives to include elements of the neighborhood somewhere in your build, because what we tried to do was, add little board and batten elements, just like our neighbors all have above their garages. And we tried to do little things that would make our home fit in, even though it was kind of popping up over the lines of the others. That was important to us to try to fit in as much as possible, even though we were going to be larger. And so I think maybe if there could be incentives for that, incentives for renovating or adding on, and maybe de-incentivizing somehow for scraping, maybe a penalty for scraping. I think that could really help. And I think that no matter what, another thing I just wanted to add is that no matter how hard we tried to fit in, we could not please everyone. We've heard from everyone in the neighborhood pretty much. And, 9 times out of 10, people are really happy. But there's those 10% that are just never going to be happy with change. And one of the lovely original owners from across the creek came over and just brought a bottle of wine the other day, wanting to see what we had done. And she said, you know what, change is inevitable and people just need to get on board. And I thought that was really sweet, considering she's lived here since everybody. And I think there's going to be an element of change is hard for people, but change has to happen, even if but I think putting some controls in there is going to be good. So that's my 2 cents about all that.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's great to hear from you, from your experience, and providing that perspective. And I mean, talking about change with limits or with controls, applies in these neighborhoods and sort of applies to this plan overall, right? That's exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. Is we know this neighborhood needs to change, but we don't want to lose the things people like about it. So how can we actually improve it through change instead of losing the character of the neighborhood? So, and then absolutely on the things of incentivizing keeping the house and doing an addition instead of scraping. Things we've looked at in other plans previously is if you keep the majority of the existing house, you can get a bonus in how much you can build. So it potentially alleviate some of those concerns, because we know, especially depending on where the house is sited on the lot, sometimes you're running into the setbacks, and so providing a little relief on those can make it easier to keep it and do the addition. There's definitely things we can do to incentivize that. And then getting into some of those finer detail things like the materials, whether it's brick or board and batten or whatever it is, that's a lot of times much harder to regulate outside of a landmark district. But what we can do is put together things like a pattern book or a design book of things that people can look at and say, all right, these are the design elements that are commonly found in this neighborhood that you can give to your architect and say, if we want this addition or this new house to fit into the neighborhood, we should be incorporating these elements. So we can help identify those, put them into a tool that homeowners can use going forward.
I think that would be really helpful. And I think that, maybe even saying like, you have to choose one element, or you have to choose 2 elements from this book for your approval process.
Yeah.
And you can incorporate that however you may, but, do something to make it fit in.
Right. Dustin.
Yeah, just a couple of things to springboard off what Erica said. I think, in terms of incentives, even like an expedited approval process seems like a nice, easy win if you're, just keeping the aesthetic, not doing significant ones, but you need to expand. But conversely, I would be hesitant to put too many penalties on scraping. Obviously, there are incentives, to not scrape. But having lived, my last 2 houses were 80 and 100 years old. When your house gets to that age, there's stuff where you're just like, man, I want to scrape this house because to go and fix it is just not worth it. So you don't want to end up where everyone's like, well, we don't want to move to that neighborhood because they don't have the conveniences of modern life, because in 20 years time these houses are going to be 80 years old, right? And it's like, to go and retrofit them into an 80-year-old house, it's not worth it. And then you have all the other efficiencies and whatever quality of life items that you just won't have. Even right now, we're looking at the insulation in the roof here, and that's going to be, potentially a $7,000 exercise. But it makes sense from a energy efficiency standpoint because, that's where we live in. But it's something, if you were to buy a new house, you wouldn't even have to think about.
Yep. Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's what we're trying to balance, right? Is we want to encourage preservation, discourage demolition, but what's the right level of that, so that if you have a house that really can't be updated or accommodated, that it's not impossible to scrape it and start over. But even if you do that, making sure that what you build in place fits in and helps advance these other goals of improving the character, improving affordability, adding additional options. So
yeah, I guess just one other one, and I don't know how prevalent it is in the other neighborhoods, but I know in our neighborhood in particular, settling and foundation issues is a big issue, and that can be a significant amount. So again, it's, do I drop $200,000 in stabilizing my house, or do I start from scratch and do it properly?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other thoughts on balancing affordability, design, and additional housing options in these neighborhoods? Okay. Again, another really good conversation. Really appreciate all the insight on that. Now talking mobility safety. And so this gets back to some of what we talked about earlier of trying to tie in those recommendations. So now we're going to talk about that. I've got a map here I'll show you in just a minute. But again, starting with some of the recommendations around improving pedestrian safety, especially where we've heard from the community there are concerns about bad pedestrian facilities, bad sidewalks, or bad crossings. And then similarly for bikes, improvements where we know we need additional facilities, or the community tells us we need additional facilities on street and at the crossings. And then slowing down cars in neighborhoods, trying to reduce conflicts between users at crossings, looking at some of the tools that we can put in to encourage people to slow down, or force people to slow down, with things like narrower lanes or better design of the streets that we know slow down cars, and things like that. So what we want to get to is a map that sort of shows where these types of improvements should be prioritized. And so what we started with is looking at where Blueprint Denver says we should have pedestrian priority. That's what you'll see as sort of a yellowish orange highlight on that map. Green is where we're recommending new pedestrian priority. And so what pedestrian priority means is on these streets, we want to make sure that we have safe, wide sidewalks and safe, accessible crossings, and that there are pleasant places for people to walk. So that it also includes things like what the landscaping situation is like, and how the buildings relate to the street and the sidewalk, so that they are truly pedestrian-oriented streets. And then some of the dots are where we have heard from the community and from looking at traffic data and crash data, where we should be prioritizing some of those pedestrian and bike intersection improvements. And so, are there other locations on this map that you think should be prioritized either for intersection improvements or for priority? And what do you think those improvements should or could look like? And then are there other sort of parameters we should use for deciding where we should prioritize things? Like, should we focus on around the schools or around the parks or in the commercial mixed use areas? Or are there certain streets within these neighborhoods that we know need additional work on slowing cars or improving safety? All right, Dustin.
Yeah, I think we talked about these last time, but on Yale along Bible Park, where the two crossings are for essentially the Highline Canal.
Yeah.
So there's one, just after Monaco and one towards Quebec.
Yeah.
They definitely need something done about them. Like I said, I think we talked about it last time, but it's worth noting on the map. I don't know if there's anything specific, other highlights you can do for vehicles. As you've got the corridor calming, and it looks like Yale has been highlighted altogether. But I think right in front of the church where the Monaco Parkway and Yale is a terrible merge. Terrible merge followed by a pedestrian crossing. So I'm surprised that I haven't seen more rear-ended vehicles or squash pedestrians there yet. It's always fun seeing who wants to race you to the merge. And then again, between Monaco Parkway and Quebec, also going north-south from Evans to Yale through Goldsmith, just to the right of the creek. It's a little bit right where the Goldsmith is written. That, what's that? Isle of Oneida, I forget which one. That one has already become a major thoroughfare for people trying to cut between Evans and Yale. I now see people regularly doing 50, 60 miles through there. And with those apartments going in on the corner of Monaco and Evans, I can only see it getting worse. So I think that needs to be called out, because it will inevitably become a thoroughfare, because it already is.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. That's helpful. Jared.
Yeah, just first of all, feedback on this map is a whole lot better than the one that's on the survey currently. The one that's on the survey currently, the low res, is really hard to read through at all. So just as way of recommendation, it looks like somebody just took a highlighter to something on the survey map. So the question on this one though is, can you delineate the difference between Blueprint Denver's pedestrian priority, which is the yellow, and the new pedestrian priority green? Because if I'm reading this right in correlation to the survey map says that all those lines are, it's got a lot of text on it too, but I think it's like these are the ones that are under construction or proposed or existing. So as somebody who walks all those sidewalks, yeah, if you could just explain the difference between green and yellow and what is actually getting done and what's just being talked about.
Yeah, so they're all at the being talked about stage. The yellow is already in a plan, so it's already in Blueprint Denver. We have a plan that says these areas should be pedestrian priority. They are not necessarily that today, as you know. The green is things that we are proposing adding to that map. So additional streets that we think should be on the list for getting those pedestrian improvements at some point in the future. So yeah, it's a change in designation for future improvements. But yeah, we recognize that the yellow ones are not all in, or most of them are not actually in the condition that we would like for a pedestrian priority street currently.
And then sorry, just to then clarify to make sure I'm reading the map right, the corridor traffic calming improvements, those are proposed, not existing, correct?
Correct.
So again, just to keep it kind of idiot proof for people like me, if we could do something that says like Southeast Denver plan pedestrian, like if there was a way to say like, hey, these are adding to try to clarify, like this is a new plan, new suggestion, both on this and the survey. I was confused even like reading the survey. I was like, oh, I don't remember all of these being completed anytime soon. So helpful, thanks.
Yeah, no, great feedback. We will try to be clearer what is existing built, what is existing proposed, what is new proposed. Yeah, it's not always clear, and it's a bit complicated. All right, Councilwoman Black.
I just wanted to respond to the request for safer crossings Bible Park on the Highline Canal. Dottie is putting in those rapid flashing beacons this fall. So that is going to happen soon.
Great, thank you. Erica.
Kind of to piggyback off of Dustin's comment, I wanted to reiterate, I think I've said it in past meetings, that Oneida, so we're right where the Goldsmith word is, it's that kind of curvy north-south line, that's Oneida. That is kind of a really great pass-through from Bible Park all the way up to Cook Park. And it crosses even north of Evans and kind of goes right into Cook Park. I think that should be added as a bicycle priority, and maybe the intersection at Evans where Oneida crosses. We take that all the time, and then just bike lanes, of some sort would be great, just to kind of make it safer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We don't have the bike improvements on this map. It got too messy when we tried to put them on there. So, but Oneida is a future bike corridor. So
and then, as Dustin said, it's also getting crazy speedy with cars on, and it is Oneida. I think he wasn't sure if it was Oneida or Iliff. It's Oneida, and maybe speed bumps or something.
Yeah, definitely. So we can, it's already in the plan for bike lanes, but we can also make sure that we're adding additional traffic calming on that.
Yeah, I just want to see the dotted line.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Jason made this map, so he's taking notes. He'll add that for you. Lisa.
So is the red dot at the end of Holly Street and Yale, is that the proposed tunneling under Yale?
Yes.
So shouldn't that be also a bicycle intersection improvement as well as pedestrian? There's a little typo there as well, but yeah. Shouldn't that have a pink dot as well?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I unfortunately already told you that Jason made this map, so.
Okay, well, no offense, Jason. I guess, I was on the Highline Canal Conservancy site, and I had to say I was kind of depressed when I read about this. I understand that this is, this improvement or this tunneling is in the works. But from what I read, it said that the design wouldn't even be finished until the end of next year. And then there would be utility realignments that would take several years before this tunneling could happen. Is that an accurate time frame? Because that's a long, that's a long time. I mean, I honestly think it's, I realize that the tunneling under Hampton took a while, but not several years, as maybe it took several years of planning that were not in the public's eye, as well as the tunneling under Parker Road that has just occurred. So is that a really legitimate time frame that really it's going to take maybe close to a decade to get that done?
Can I
don't know. Yeah,
that?
Please.
Yeah, so the tunnel at Yale and Holly was the project I fought very hard for to get on the 2017 bond. And for bond projects, you have to complete them in 10 years. There were absolutely no plans for it. And normally they don't put things in the bond that aren't designed. And the way the bonds work is they prioritize all the projects that are shovel ready. So all those have to be built first. And so, yes, this project is at the end of the line, but it has to be done by 2017. The project is many times more complicated and bigger than anticipated. And so it is gonna take a long time, but it has to be done by 2027. The tunnels at Parker Road and Mississippi and the ones at Hampton and Colorado took from inception to completion took many, many, many years. They're very complicated, multi-jurisdictional, millions of dollars. You have to move utilities, and so they take a really long time.
I really appreciate your input. I mean, you kind of see them when they're under the construction and, you know, you wait for them and it seems like, oh, it's only 2 or 3 years, but you know, I know that it's not. It just was a little disconcerting to see that, you know, that even the Highland Conservancy was just kind of sort of, you know, yes, it's sort of approved, but it's really not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
In the meanwhile, it would be nice to have much better signage there, like bicycle crossing with, you know, flashing lights that actually blind drivers, I think would be good. Yeah. In the meanwhile, I mean, I think that, you know, not having something that says this is a bike crossing for that right turn that goes south on Holly, that right turn merge lane that goes into Yale is it's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, that's a great point that we can.
You're either going to get rear-ended by a bike behind you, or you're going to get run over by a car, and you got to decide which one you're going to prefer.
Yeah, we can look at maybe we can make some sort of temporary safety improvements while we're waiting for that that tunnel to be completed. Because the tunnels are sort of like icebergs, where the work you see of actually digging the tunnel is a fraction of all the work that goes into making it happen.
Understood. And I do also want to say everything that Erica said about Oneida is correct. I use that street exclusively as a bike street. I use it quite often, and the traffic on it is getting more and more problematical.
Okay. All right. Any other comments on the mobility safety improvements? All right. We were going to talk former Chapter 59 stuff, but we only got 5 minutes left. So I'm going to save that for next month, because there's a lot of background information that I need to give you for us to have a conversation about it at all. So with the last few minutes here, let's open it up to any other comments on the recommendations or the surveys or the comment or the engagement that folks have. I know Dustin had some comments they shared in the email, so I don't know if you want to go back to that. I know you sort of talked about some of that as we've gone on tonight, or anyone else have anything else?
I guess just on the survey, and again, I gave up pretty quickly. So it might not be indicative of all of them. I think it was the housing one I did first, because that was the one I felt most strongly about at the time. But I guess just, you know, from my personal experience doing it, I found there was a lot of verbiage to get through, and it was all sans serif, which is not great to read in giant blocks of text. And then on the next page was all the questions, and having not memorized the wall of text, I couldn't answer the questions. And again, I wanted to give an accurate question. And then the kicker was there wasn't even a link I could pull up to say, all right, on screen 1, I have the wall of text. On screen 2, I have my answer. So it was kind of like a very bad closed book exam. So I guess, you know, in terms of feedback, if you can make it a bit easier to read and have both materials so you can be answering questions while referring back to the, you know, text, that would make it a lot easier, at least from my perspective. I have to do a lot of surveys for work, and I had a 30-second survey I had people filling out, and they asked me to remove the date input so it would save them 2 seconds. So I know the frustration, but that was, again, my very limited experience, but I thought I'd share that. I don't know if that's the same across all 4, if I just happened to pick the worst one to begin with for that.
Yeah, The question should be on the same page as the text, so we'll take a look at that. Because if you're getting that, then we've messed up making the survey, certainly. And then, yeah, the housing and economy one is probably the driest and most technical of the four. So you may have just picked the worst one to start with. But yeah, we'll take a look at ways we can improve the readability, and then double check to make sure that the questions are on the same page as the draft recommendations that we're asking about, because that's certainly the way it should be. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, I just the level of discussion and debate and consideration on difficult issues that I think is really going to lead us to a plan that's got some substance to it. I just want to thank everyone on the committee and everyone on staff. For me, this was as good a meeting, if not the best, I've been to with this steering committee.
Yeah, I appreciate that and totally agree. The conversation tonight was, I think, really good, really helpful for us in improving the recommendations and the plan process. So really appreciate everyone's thoughts and insights tonight, and really appreciate you continuing to show up to these meetings. I think there's definitely value in it. So I hope you're finding value in it as well. Jared, and then we'll get to Jim.
Yeah, just on the survey again, I think trying to remember that a vast majority of your people are going to be working off mobile devices on this. And so again, if there's any way that we can figure out how to shrink some of this stuff down, I appreciate the level of detail on it. But the only reason I finished it is because I skimmed it. And so if there's some version of click here to read the full statement, but from my vantage point, my gut says that you're probably going to be in the high 70%. People are going to be doing this on a mobile device, not on a desktop. So if it's being designed on anything other than a mobile, you're probably not paying attention to your end users.
Yeah, good point. We are making it on a desktop. It is intended to scale appropriately, but we should probably be paying more attention to make sure that when it does shrink down to a phone, it still works as well as we'd like it to. Then yeah, we, like I said, we debated how to address the amount of text, and we talked about that option of having something else that people who wanted to read all the details could read it separately. And we ended up not doing that, but we did instead just keep some of the recommendations at more of a summary level to try to keep it somewhat shorter. So we were trying to split the difference. I'm not sure that, maybe we didn't make the right decision on that, but yeah, I appreciate your feedback on that. And we will continue to think about how to do that better going forward. And then Jim, you were raising your hand too.
Yes, Scott, you had asked me to continue to bring something up that I have not either been available to bring up or have not brought up until now, but I would like to suggest that we all meet in person. This is easy. We get along. I respect everybody's opinions. We all have good stuff to throw in, but why don't you arrange something either for next month or the month after where we all meet in person, face to face? I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up again, Jim. I appreciate you continuing to remind me on that. We had a walking tour, 2 weeks ago, that a few of you attended. And I know not everybody could make that or was interested. And so really appreciate the folks who did. I think we had a great time, had a great conversation about that, and then stopped off at Junction for drinks and some snacks afterwards. And so, yeah, I think as we talked about at that, we would like to do probably at least one more of those, maybe up north along Leedsdale and that sort of area. So we'll try to get that scheduled for this fall. And then, yeah, folks are interested in other types of get-togethers. We're open to it. When we've polled you twice now, I think, about how you'd like to do the meetings. And the majority have said they'd like to continue for these meetings to do them on Zoom with opportunities for in-person meetings otherwise. So that's sort of what we're leaning towards. But yeah, we're happy to look at doing another walking tour. And then if folks are interested in just a straight up happy hour or some other type of get together, we're totally open to that as well.
Great, thank you. I've been out of town. I've missed the last two. That's my fault, but I'm really anxious to meet everybody face to face.
Yeah, great point. So yeah, we'll get started on thinking about another walking tour, and then maybe think about something else on top of that.
Thank you.
All right, we're a couple minutes over. So if anyone else has anything else they'd like to bring up, now's your last chance. Otherwise, we will be done for this month. Next meeting will be September 14th, it looks like. So slightly late meeting in September, but that's when we will reconvene. All right, great. Thanks to everybody. Again,
One
really
quick one,
appreciate
Scott.
the conversation.
When do the surveys close?
We don't have a firm date on that yet. We're looking at sort of early September, maybe just after Labor Day. But it'll somewhat depend on feedback. If we still don't think we've got enough respondents, we'll keep them open a little longer.
I shall endeavor to revisit them.
Thank you.
Last thing I wanted to add is I'm a little uncomfortable with the plan to release what I understood to be the next iteration of the plan during the year-end holidays. So if we could throw that on the table.
Yeah, we can have more conversation about the timing of that. And it'll depend on when we close the survey and how long it takes us to get the draft ready. And we'll talk more about that. But noted. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.